Yeah, I was kind of curious where I'd fit in this conference. I'm delighted to be on such a interesting panel, to be honest. Yeah, so the this presentation I'm going to give today is based on a paper that we published in December of 2025, also called Building Adaptably: How the Construction Sector Can Future-Proof Irish Cities. And yeah, the exam question we kind of set ourselves with this paper was, given the huge amounts of office vacancy that we're seeing and the struggles that the speculative model of development is experiencing, is there a way we can use that to address the accompanying shortfall in housing supplies in the very areas where we're seeing this vacancy? So yeah, so what I want to cover is really just to give a bit of context about where Ireland's built environment is, because we are in quite an extreme scenario, I would say. I want to look at what building adaptability is as a model and how it's different to our current approach. I'll make the case for Ireland being particularly suitable to embrace this model of building, and then I'll finish with some policy recommendations. But yeah, as I said, I think it's important to kind of reflect on where we are with Ireland's built environment. So when it comes to commercial vacancy, we have the highest rate we've ever had. And in 2024, Dublin had the highest rate of office vacancy of any major European city. And yeah, as I mentioned, this vacancy tends to be concentrated in areas of high housing need and demand. And then there's an environmental dimension to this as well, because construction and demolition waste, which is the most voluminous source of waste in the economy, is forecast to double between 2020 and 2029. That's partly a function of our demolish and rebuild model. And yeah, on a positive note, where you do convert a building instead of demolish it, you save 73% of embodied carbon. So our current model is producing quite a lot of embodied carbon because we tend to demolish and rebuild. But actually, where we are at the moment in terms of our construction model is quite different to the typical model that has been in place throughout history, which has tended to embrace the idea that a building can adapt to fit the social and economic trends that surround it, rather than needing to be demolished and rebuilt to fit a current cycle. And I've taken a quote from Jane Jacobs there, which sums it up pretty nicely. So time makes certain structures obsolete for some enterprises and they come available to others. And as I said, this has been typical throughout history. So if we go all the way back, the Parthenon was originally a temple, then it was converted to a treasury, a church, a mosque, and now it's obviously a very famous tourist attraction. And in Amsterdam, the housing that lines the canals that all looks really nice in postcards, etc., that was originally warehousing. It was then converted to housing, offices, shops, and now it's obviously being converted back to housing. But I think the most kind of in-your-face example of this is Manhattan. So up until the middle of the 20th century, Manhattan was actually mostly a kind of a commuting hub for the other boroughs and the state of New York. But in the middle of the 20th century, they started to convert some of the older office buildings into residential blocks, and now it's obviously well known as a residential mecca. But what we're seeing at the moment is the construction model is in this kind of present bias trap, as it's called in the literature. So the idea being that whatever gets built is defined by short-term cycles, and this results in single-function buildings that become obsolete assets. And essentially what we see in present bias in building design is where form rigidly relates to function. So if we build an office, it can only ever really fulfill the function of being an office. If we build a school, it can only ever be a school, cultural center, hospital, whatever it might be. They tend to only ever be able to fulfill one function. And this tends to create a mismatch when the circumstances in the economy change. And indeed, you'd have to say, at the moment in Ireland, we're kind of seeing the results of this mismatch, as evidenced by the level of commercial vacancy that we're experiencing at the moment. So as I said, we have the highest rate of commercial vacancy we've ever had, and these stats are from Geo Directory, I should say, and it seems every quarter it is actually getting higher. We've kind of slowed down now, but the speculative real estate model had continued to kind of pump new space into this environment. And And a lot of the new uptake of leases in office environments in cities tends to be churn. So existing tenants moving within the city rather than new entrants coming in. And you can see here on your right, this is data from the central bank, that office vacancy in Dublin has quadrupled almost since 2019. And yeah, this is not just a Dublin issue. Dublin is a kind of a city or a county level trend of a wider national trend. The highest rates of vacancy are actually in the northwest in Sligo and Donegal, Galway and Limerick. Cork has been a bit more resilient due to the public sector leasing from the HSE. This is just a graphic showing you when Dublin had the highest rate of commercial vacancy of any major European city in 2024. And none of what I'm going to say here in terms of why this is the case will be surprising to you. Obviously, since COVID, we have embraced a new working model, remote working, hybrid working, whatever it may be. And while there has been some pushback on this recently from firms putting in place return to work protocols, no one is talking about going back to the office 5 days a week. These return to work protocols tend to focus on moving from 3 or 4 days a week outside the office to 2 or 3 days a week outside the office. Allied to that shift in work practices, since 2022, we've seen a global contraction of the tech sector. So it started off with a lot of layoffs happening, and then it kind of has been in a steady state of hiring freezes since about 2023. But yeah, obviously more recently, we've seen that layoffs have kicked in again. And obviously when you take these two things together, when you take Ireland or cities like Dublin and Cork, which has very much hitched its economy to the tech sector, the combination of a contraction of that sector along with changing work practices just results in a structural decline in the need for office space. So it's kind of mixed as to how much office occupancy we actually have as compared to post-COVID. But the most recent one I saw was in the Business Post, and they were saying we're kind of settling at somewhere around 52%. So we just don't use as much office space as we used to, and it's unlikely that we will into the future. And obviously, alongside this oversupply and vacancy in the commercial real estate sector, we have an ongoing issue with housing undersupply. And these crises very much exist alongside each other. And it's not just the case that, Dublin as a place or Cork as a place, as a county, has this kind of mismatch. It tends to be the very areas where you have the highest level of vacancy within a city are the very areas where housing demand and need is highest, and we're struggling to increase housing supply. And yeah, obviously there are huge societal consequences to our failure to meet housing need and demand, which we're all very familiar with. So to our mind, this is just a failure of the speculative model of building. It's really struggling to turn itself around. And for that reason, we think this is the space for policy intervention. So what we are envisaging, I suppose, as an intervention at a very high level is essentially to move away from this present bias, move away from building in a way where form rigidly relates to function, away from demolish and rebuild to a more agile circular economy approach to the way that we do building. There are already frameworks in place to measure the adaptability of buildings, so that isn't something we would need to put in place ourselves. And this would be one way of addressing the environmental impacts, addressing or creating a new source of housing supply, but also to say there is a huge cost to urban vacancy of commercial buildings. It creates what they call in the literature an urban doom loop, where an office is built, it isn't leased, there are no business rates obtained by the local authority, and that results in a deterioration of public services. So specifically what we're suggesting, and I've just pulled a quote from the paper here, is that we would introduce adaptability metrics into the planning permission decision-making process. Assessing a building's adaptability would ensure that new buildings are designed to meet real demand rather than future speculative demand. So what we're suggesting is that we would use the EU levels framework, which measures building adaptability. You can generate an adaptability score from that. And that a large-scale building project, so to be clear, we're not suggesting that all building projects will be subject to this requirement, just large-scale building projects in central urban cores where demand shifts are quite frequent. So when you're building a large-scale building project, it would have to reach a certain adaptability requirement. And obviously, to reduce the administrative burden, this wouldn't be done on a case-by-case basis. This could be introduced through city development plans. And of course, it would have the benefit of actually aligning with our climate and circular economy acts. This is not a new idea. It's very much embedded already in cities across Europe and in the US. So the most recent London 2021 plan has introduced mandates designs that are fit for purpose today and into the future. Paris has kind of used an embrace of modern methods of construction, which allows for modular building, which is very conducive to this kind of adaptable reuse. And they've changed their zoning code so that you can build using modular approach and you don't need to apply for planning permission to change use. And of course, Amsterdam has been doing this for some time, and they operate with this long life, loose fit approach. And if you go to Noord Amsterdam, it was formerly an industrial estate. That's now a kind of a mixed use, highly desirable neighborhood with a mix of residential, commercial, and retail. So just to give you some visuals of what this actually looks like, this is a former office building in Amsterdam, which has been retrofit into a residential development. This is an office building on Broadway in New York, which is currently being remodeled into a residential building. So this is already operating in various different places. And actually, Ireland is a particularly suitable place to adopt and to embrace building adaptability. I've mentioned the macroeconomic point, the fact that we're kind of going through this double crisis of commercial vacancy and shortfalls in housing supply in central urban locations. Our vacancy does tend to be concentrated in city centres, and obviously these are areas that are very well served by existing infrastructure, as well as having high demand. Our demographics are shifting to smaller household sizes. And if you look at the literature, the evidence is that these kind of conversions tend to yield smaller 1 and 2 bed units, which we're often told are unviable to build. So this is a potential new stream of those type of units. And yeah, planning obviously takes a huge kicking in this country generally speaking, but actually we do have quite strong governance tools as a result of our planning system. And there is a legislative power held through the city development plan, which could mandate for this type of adaptable construction. And then just to make the point finally, kind of related to the demographics point, this is a far more financially viable way to deliver small 1 and 2 bed units than a demolish and rebuild model, which we are repeatedly told is just simply not viable to build without huge subsidy. Just to briefly touch on the building characteristics that facilitate adaptability, and I'll just, I suppose, focus on high floor to ceiling heights that allows for potential residential use, and then non-load bearing partitions, the second from the bottom. That's important because it allows you to reconfigure quite easily each given floor in a building. So in terms of what we're recommending, so the first 3 are geared at the kind of the local authority or regional assembly level, I would say, in Ireland, focused on the city development plan. So yes, to mandate adaptability assessments. Again, to be clear, only for large scale projects that are taking place within a central urban location. You would have to be able to display using, for example, the EU levels framework, that your proposal could be adapted to different uses over time. Require conversion scenarios, so compel planning applicants to submit future use scenarios to prevent buildings from becoming prematurely obsolete. There's a lot of work being done across government departments to try and embrace modern methods of construction. This is a very clear way that this could be done, because modular buildings, as I mentioned in the case of Paris, tends to be adaptable to different uses much more so than buildings delivered using traditional methods. And then the final recommendation is really geared at national government. So by using public land, you could be an exemplar in how this could work. So we already do this now since last year in terms of social housing delivery. There are bonuses for using modern methods of construction. If we could give some exemplar cases of using public land to embrace the use of building adaptability, that could give a signal to the market that this is indeed possible and that the outcomes are achievable and beneficial. So just to finish and to say where I started, we have a real crisis in terms of commercial vacancy in the very areas where we're struggling to build new housing. Our building model is quite archaic and quite different really to what the historical trend has been in the construction sector. And yeah, we're suggesting some low intervention really ways that this could be addressed to improve environmental, economic and social outcomes. Thank you.
Very much.